Welcome everybody to our capstone evening presentations. We're going to get started. It's 5:30 to try to stay on schedule. Our first presentation tonight is Andrew Shosho, and he's presenting on brownfield remediation and environmental engineering. And with that, Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Hello, everybody. Good evening. For my Semester 2 capstone project, I researched and applied the practices of environmental engineering and focused on brownfield remediation, which is a type of environmental engineering. Here's today's agenda. First, I will overview what brownfield remediation is, and then begin a hypothetical remediation. Next, I will explain how to treat asbestos and how to demolish a large building, followed up with the importance of analyzing samples of the brownfield. Then, I will spend some time explaining a groundwater treatment system and a vacuum-enhanced recovery system. And to wrap up, I will talk about bio and phytoremediation and low-impact development. Brownfields are former commercial and industrial sites. Often, they are contaminated with certain chemicals or toxins. Remediation is the act of reversing or stopping environmental damage. More simply, cleaning up. That means that brownfield remediation is the act of cleaning up contaminated commercial or industrial sites. There are many different types of brownfields. Some of these include abandoned factories, power plants, warehouses, junkyards, other industries. Next, I learned about the overarching processes of brownfield remediation. Here's a brief introduction. To start, one would have to own the brownfield that they have the intention of remediating. Many of these brownfields have pending legal issues, so these would need to be settled before anything can be done. Also, it would have to make financial sense to remediate the property. Nobody wants to lose millions of dollars. There would have to be some financial benefit to remediating the site. After that's all settled, phase 1, or the assessment of the site, can begin. Here, one has to learn characteristics of the site history, and the former site function. Then, phase 2, or the investigation of the site, can commence. This is the sampling stage. One would want to sample the soil, groundwater, and even the air all around the property, and then analyze those findings. These findings would be really important for phase 3, the design phase. Here, the engineer would use all that sampling data and create what is called the remedial action plan. Clean up the site and identify the extent of excavation. Finally, the last phase, phase 4, is the construction phase. This phase would be when all the planning would finally be put into action. For example, the groundwater recovery wells drilled and the groundwater treatment plant would commence. And it would commence operation at English Station. Using all the concepts we just went over, I decided to hypothetically remediate the defunct English Station power plant in New Haven. This hypothetical remediation would link up all that I learned and actually apply it. Have you recently driven over the Q Bridge in New Haven? On the right side of the highway, you can see the power plant, right where that red arrow is pointing. Here is a picture of it from the highway. Hopefully, you're somewhat familiar with this brownfield. The site was questionably purchased in 2006 for only $1 and is currently in litigation. Currently, the owners, prior owners, local governments, and the Connecticut Department of Environmental and Energy Protection are settling legal disputes. The remediation cannot move forward until a decision is met in court. Also, I calculated this entire remediation would cost approximately $50 million. Since this is hypothetical, we're only going to focus on the brownfield remediation part. Now can begin phase 1. This is the phase where we learn about the site. The power plant part of the site is about 232,500 square feet and sits at sea level. The soil below the site is classified as sandy loam. This is important because it means that many of the toxins that were created on the site could easily seep through the ground to the underground aquifer, which lies about 27 feet below the site. Because the toxins can reach the groundwater is not potable or fit for human consumption. On ground level, the site is surrounded on 3 sides by the Mill River and is only 100 yards to the neighborhoods of Fairhaven. The power plant was built in 1929 and used as a coal power station until the 50s, where it was converted to use oil. It closed in 1992 and has been unused since. The next part of phase 1 is determining how the site functioned. To help me understand the site function, I constructed a model. So here's my model. It's not 100% to scale or completely representative of the actual building, but after studying the publicly available blueprints, I was able to determine that this was roughly how the power plant was set up. Firstly, the coal or oil would be brought up to the riverbank here, where it would be loaded into the power plant and put in this yellow oil tank over here. With the help of a conveyor belt, it would be transported through these 12 low-density boilers in the back and eventually reaching the 2 high-density boilers over here. The only difference between high-density and low-density boilers is that high-density boilers are more pressurized, which creates more energy. The coal or oil would be burned, and the ash and smoke would be transported up the blue pipes, up the smokestacks, and into the air above. Boilers would also contain pipes running around them that had water in them. The water would be turned into steam when the boilers would be heated, and this would create steam, which would flow through these red tubes here into the wind tunnel, which contained 13 turbines. Steam would spin the turbines, and this would create energy, which would be put in the energy grid above. However, this process created and needed some chemicals and toxins. From my research, I was able to determine that on site there's asbestos, petroleum hydrocarbons such as benzene, and polychlorinated biphenyls, whose acronym is PCBs, which is much easier to say. PCBs are chemicals used to insulate pressurized and heated equipment and are a serious environmental hazard. There are fluorine substances too, which are used very similarly to PCBs. There are also some heavy metals, such as mercury and lead, as well as ash from burnt coal on site. On the right side is an excerpt from an EPA report that stated that in 2014, about 1,500 gallons of PCB lead and oil leaked into the Mill River. That would be the equivalent amount of gasoline as pumping gas for over 93 cars at the gas station. The first toxin that I decided to tackle is asbestos because it needs to be removed before our next step, the demolition. Asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral which is very durable and low cost. Breathing in asbestos can cause serious illnesses, which include lung cancer, mesothelioma, and other cancers, such as in the esophagus, stomach, and colon. It has a latency period of 30 years, which means that you could have inhaled too much asbestos in 1990, not had any health issues since then, but just now get diagnosed with a serious cancer or other illness from the asbestos. There are 4 steps to treating asbestos. The first is a survey, which is where you determine where the asbestos would be located. According to the TRC report, asbestos was commonly found in floor tiles, window glazing, insulation, electrical equipment, mastic, which is like resin or glue, as well as gaskets, caulk on the roof, tar, and on the walls. The next step is to delineate the asbestos-containing material by separating the asbestos from everything else, and spraying it down with water to make sure the asbestos particles can't fly around the air or get in your lungs. Large fans would be installed to make sure if the asbestos does get in the air, it would be dispersed into the sky where it is not concentrated enough to do any damage. Next, in the abatement step, the asbestos-containing material would be put in labeled storage bags or drums, and in the waste disposal step, it would be sent to a specialized landfill that can contain the asbestos without hurting the environment. Now that the asbestos was removed, the building needs to be demolished. First, the engineer would need to obtain a Class A permit that demonstrates they know how to demolish a large building. Next, the engineering firm would need to prove that in the event something goes wrong, they have enough money and the proper insurance to pay for any damages of a failed demolition. Also, as this demolition would happen along the water, a fishery permit may be needed because the blast from the dynamite may hurt some marine life. The fire department and Coast Guard would also have to be notified. If there is a large fire or other catastrophe, first responders have to be ready to jump into action. The fire department would likely close the nearby roads to make sure that people do not get close to the explosions. By law, the adjoining property owners have to be notified of the demolition, but it would also be common courtesy to alert all nearby residents so they are prepared for the blasts. Lastly, the utilities such as electricity, natural gas, and sewage systems have to be disconnected because we do not want the electrical grid going up in flames or the sewage and natural gas pipes leaking. Finally, we are ready to actually demolish the building. But first, the engineer would need to plan it all out. I decided that the smokestacks would need to be manually deconstructed because if they were to fall the wrong way, they could knock out live power lines running next to the power plant. The easiest way to do this would be with the help of a barge in a nearby river and a crane lifting smokestack components off the roof. Then, triglycerides, or more commonly called dynamite, would be placed in a specific order around the building. These triglycerides would be placed around important structural components, such as large beams, so that the strong components can be knocked out. Then, the rest of the weakened building will fall. An important thing to remember, though, is that the engineer needs the building to fall on top of itself. The building can't fall into the river or blow projectiles into people's houses. It has to neatly fall into a pile. To start the dynamite, a bunch of weak blasts will be set off, weakening the key structural components. Then, strong blasts of dynamite will break the key components and the building can fall onto itself. The debris left behind can either be disposed of or recycled. Here is a video of a demolition in Arlington, Virginia. Listen for the weak blasts followed by the strong blasts and see how the building falls onto itself. Now the building is demolished, we need to begin phase 2. This is where we sample the site and learn about which toxins are on site. However, I could not do any sampling. Luckily, I could find a table of some random sampling on English Station another group has done, which is seen on this slide. Here, hundreds of samples are tested for 41 different toxins. Above, you can see that I have a value circled in red. That data shows that in sample 51, there were 3 parts of PCBs per million parts. This is in violation of the legal limit and needs to be treated. I studied this sampling data, and eventually, I was able to match different samples with each of their respective locations. These. I placed the first sample, titled ES1, where the yellow oil tank was for our model. I did this because the data says that this sample has 922,260 parts per million of PPH, which is an acronym for total petroleum hydrocarbons. That means that for ES1, over 92% of the sample was pure oil. Therefore, it is logical to place it where the oil tanks once was. I did this sort of thing with a bunch of other samples, some of them also seen on the diagram. I based this sample location map off of other brownfield remediations that have actually occurred and included little icons showing where the monitoring wells, test pits, or soil borings would be placed. These 3 things are basically just different places to take samples from. Some of these icons do not have any sample attached to them. That is because they are in areas that would not have many toxins, such as in the turbine hall. There is also a red box above, where the high-density boiler stood. I decided that it would make sense to excavate this area to the depth of 10 feet because it is a PCB hotspot. The high-density boiler room would be under tremendous pressure, so PCBs were used to insulate and shield the boiler room from the rest of the power plant. However, over time, PCBs likely settled in the ground right below the high-density boilers and obviously cannot stay there. Because of this, the soil here would be excavated and sent to a specialized treatment facility that would know how to treat the PCBs. This excavated area would be lined with a high-density polyethylene waterproofing barrier that the groundwater treatment system will be housed in, which I will cover in a minute. Also, I included an outfall trench, which is the little red line between the red box and river. This will also be part of the groundwater treatment system. So, with all this talk about a groundwater treatment system, let's move to phase 3 and cover the design for the groundwater treatment system. This is called the on-site recovery plan. The engineer can install a series of extraction wells, seen on this slide, that pump contaminated groundwater up and deposit it into that red excavated box we just talked about. I covered the site with 15 wells to ensure full coverage of the contaminated aquifer that lies below. Since this aquifer also lies below the Quinnipiac and Mill rivers, the aquifer would likely be able to refill when depleted. Here's a side view of one of those extraction wells, which were scattered around the power plant. The well would have small inlets and pump the contaminated groundwater from the aquifer and send it through a long pipe series to treatment plant, which once again is in the excavated zone. This extracted groundwater, contaminated groundwater, gets pumped into the treatment facility. There it goes into a large tank called an aeration tank. Here it sits for 30 to 60 minutes, and eventually any sediment or other very heavy substances fall to the bottom and get pumped to the filter press. In the filter press, the settlable solids get compressed to form large sheets called filter cake that get transported to a landfill. An aeration blower blows air at the contaminated water, which helps oxidize dissolved metals, which are captured by the sand filters. They are unable to filter through the fine sand and settle at the top. Then, they are scraped off the sand and also sent to the filter press. The liquid, which is referred to as effluent, that does filter through the sand, is then pumped to the air strippers. These blow a strong stream of air at the effluent, which captures and transports volatile organic compounds, such as tetrachloroethylene, to the gas phase granulated activated carbon tanks, which is a very fancy name for a giant Brita water filter. The carbon in these tanks bonds easily with the volatile organic compounds, which are very long hydrocarbon chains. This way, the saturated carbon can be collected and transported to a special facility. The effluent from the air stripper, however, gets piped to bag filters, which are like giant coffee filters. Finally, the effluent is so clean that it can be pumped through the trench we dug back on an excavated material slide and emptied into the river. But how do we know that the effluent is clean enough? Well, the Connecticut Department of Environmental and Energy Protection has a set of National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System standards, shortened NPDES. Twice a month, samples would be taken from the outfall area and tested. The table on the left is an example of that sampling data from a similar remediation. The yellow circle shows that in outfall for the remediation, the amount of trichloroethylene in the sample was 1 milligram per liter. Now, if we consult the Connecticut NPDES standards, we can see that the limit for total volatile organics, which covers trichloroethylene, would be 5 milligrams per liter. Obviously, these outfall data are all far below the legal limit. This exact same process would be followed in the English station remediation. Now, do you remember the extraction well diagram from a few minutes ago? Well, when the groundwater gets pumped out of the aquifer, some contaminants volatilize into the gas phase. Therefore, there would be a vacuum part of the extraction, vacuuming up the gaseous contaminants. This is called vacuum-enhanced recovery. These contaminants would be vacuumed all the way to a flame ionization detector. This is a piece of technology that measures the mass of the gaseous petroleum hydrocarbons by measuring it to a methane equivalent. This is done because methane acts as a common denominator for all the possible hydrocarbons that get vacuumed up. These results tell the engineer how much product is being recovered. And then the hydrocarbons get stored in gas phase activated carbon tanks, like those tanks we just talked about. Now that the groundwater has been treated, the engineer can focus on removing toxins still stuck in the soil. Bioremediation is one way to accomplish this. Basically, bioremediation is new technology that uses microbes and bacteria to naturally degrade any harmful organic substances. The engineer would look for the soil's pH and if there is any dissolved oxygen in the soil. All this information helps the engineer decide which bacteria to use. For example, if only anaerobic bacteria can break down the contaminant of concern and there is oxygen content in the soil, then that bacteria will not be effective because anaerobic bacteria cannot survive where there is oxygen. And I have a few more examples of successful bioremediation on this slide, like archaea microbes breaking down ammonia. Similar to bioremediation is phytoremediation. Phytoremediation uses plants and trees to treat contaminants in the soil and groundwater. The roots of the trees suck the contaminants up and then naturally break them down and release harmless products. That picture on the right is a phytoremediation forest that is treating a contaminated site in California that was polluted by the US Navy producing military aircraft. Phytoremediation has also been used by the US Air Force to treat trichloroethylene, which is a toxin present on English station. I would plan to plant many trees, the most effective are poplars, to treat some of the soil and groundwater on the site. However, it is very hard to quantify the impact of phytoremediation, as it is hard to test for results and takes a very long time. Either way, planting trees has no downsides. This moves us to our last topic, low-impact development. In any green areas of the now remediated and demolished English station, low-impact development would be implemented. This is landscaping that mimics the natural hydrology, or the way water moves on the site. It most importantly promotes rainwater infiltration and evapotranspiration, which is water being evaporated from plants. This way, stormwater will not run off. This reduces erosion and makes sure that any pollutants still on site do not end up in the aquifer again, in sewers, or in Long Island Sound. Very frequent features of low-impact development are bioswales and rain gardens. Basically, trenches are dug at strategic intervals around the site. When it rains, the storm water ends up collecting in these trenches, or bioswales. From there, they flow to a giant hole in the ground that is filled with gravel, as seen with the picture on the lower left. This hole is approximately 65% gravel and 35% porosity, or open space, and has plants growing around it. These conditions mean large amounts of water can gather there and then infiltrate into the ground where plants' roots can access it. These two concepts working in tandem make sure that any rainwater is collected and able to soak into the ground without eroding the ground or allowing any waste to get into Long Island Sound. Lastly, ripraps would be installed on the banks of the island. These are just big rock piles that help mitigate erosion on shorelines from water, waves, and ice. This way, any remaining contaminated soil not end up flowing into the river and ocean. This would be the last step of the brownfield remediation of English Station. To recap, we learned about a hazardous brownfield 10 miles from Guilford. We learned the steps of how to treat the toxins the site produced, including sampling, removing asbestos, creating a groundwater treatment system, and a vacuum-enhanced recovery system. We also learned how a demolition is done. Then, we experimented with two new technologies, bio and phytoremediation, to treat some contaminated soil. And lastly, we beautified and protected the island from erosion by introducing bioswales, rain gardens, and ripraps. Lastly, I wanted to thank my advisor and chemistry teacher, Ms. Pinkowski, my mentor, George Kokliaris, who helped me immensely throughout all steps of this project, and Patrick Abu-Charuch, who helped me with the demolition phase of this project. They are professional engineers who work for infrastructure and environmental engineering companies based out of New York City. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and learned something. Thank you for joining me today. Now, if anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Andrew, I'll start with one. How did you get interested in this topic? it doesn't seem like something you would wake up one day and just say, I want to study. What led you to this topic?
Well, I've been enjoying chemistry a lot this year, and I have a love for nature, and I just feel that it was at the crossroads of so many of my passions and impacted everyone around this area so much that it was just perfect to start researching, and eventually it led me to try it out with a capstone, and I've really enjoyed the entire process. So
Did a great job. It was very, very detailed presentation. I love the way you used a real world example to demonstrate the process. I thought that was great.
Hey, Andrew, do you think going through this whole process is going to influence where you go from here when you go on to college and such?
I definitely think so. I really enjoy doing this project, and I believe that I will want to do this one day later in my life. So, yeah.
Mr. Hoey, do you have your hand raised?
I do, Mr. Reven. Andrew, that was an amazing presentation. Not only the subject matter, your command of the subject matter, but I'm very impressed with your presentation skills. You did a terrific job there. Just a couple of quick questions. One, is there a specific methodology for where they place the wells to draw the groundwater out? Because I noticed that in the placement you had, there were none over to the lower left of the peninsula where the grassy area was. Is there a particular reason for that?
Yes, so you would want to space them out evenly across the site at certain intervals, and the reason they weren't placed in that grassy area is because that area was not actually part of the site. That was a different part of the power plant that has already been treated by United Illuminating.
Wonderful. Thank you. One last question. I know you mentioned a couple of things that needed to be done differently than, let's say, a remediation at our old public works facility on Route 146 at Graves Avenue. But because of the proximity to the river and to the harbor, there are more substantial cautions or precautions that need to be taken?
Of course, just with every phase there was, with the demolition, for example, I guess you have to make sure that it's more controlled than normal, just because of if it does happen to go one way, the wrong way, it could end up in the river. If the treatment facility has a break, it could end up in the river. It's just so intertwined with that river because it's so near to it that extra precautions have to be taken at virtually every step.
Thank you very much.
Any last questions before we move on to our next presenter? It's just about 6 o'clock.
I'd actually like to just, say a few words.
Sure.
Wanted to say how much I enjoyed working with Andrew this semester. He made it very, very easy and very enjoyable that, a couple of hours flew by and it did not feel like it. I didn't really do much either. He really picked up everything quicker than, shouldn't really let my colleagues hear me, but he picked it up quicker than a lot of the engineers here. So that was very impressive. And yeah, I'm honestly getting a little teary-eyed. It was fun working with him. So I absolutely plan on keeping in touch.
Thank you, George.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Andrew, thank you so much. You did a fantastic job. We really appreciate you presenting for us tonight. I saw Charlotte just popped her camera on. So our next presentation is from Charlotte Atherton, and she's going to present on the effects of synthetic fertilizers on local waterways. And I am going to turn it right over to you, Charlotte.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte Atherton. I'm currently a junior at Guilford High School. Let me just share my screen quickly. So I did my project on an investigation into the negative effects of synthetic lawn fertilizers on local waterways. I found this quote while conducting my research and really felt that it captured my motivation for doing this project and for my love of this topic and other environmental topics. It reads, "We need to work with the natural system instead of trying to fight against it." To kind of introduce what really is synthetic lawn fertilizer. A synthetic lawn fertilizer can be defined simply as a fertilizer composed of manufactured chemicals, which most often include nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, together known as NPK. Unlike organic lawn fertilizers, synthetics are highly concentrated and fast-acting, which appeals to homeowners for their ability to force grass growth and inhibit weeds. However, despite these apparent short-term advantages, these synthetic fertilizers can have majorly negative impacts. Given their proximity to urban and suburban lawns, which now cover around 2% of the entire land area of the United States, water bodies are particularly vulnerable to runoff from synthetic fertilizers. Compelled by the local saying that what goes in the ground goes in the sound, I conducted a literature review in 5 different sections about synthetic fertilizers and their negative effects on the rivers and salt marshes of my hometown of Guilford, Connecticut. I have constructed this report to describe the history of the lawn in America, the biological effects of synthetic fertilizers, their use in the United States today, and then narrowing it down to their use in Connecticut, and then concluding with my own recommendations for the future. So let's look back to see where this fascination with the lawn began in America. The increase in the use of synthetic fertilizers and other lawn-enhancing products can be traced back to a movement around 400 years ago in the United States. In 1620, English settlers started to arrive in the New World, bringing with them livestock that relied on native grass for food. Addressing this supply shortage, English ships brought over grass, clover seeds, and accidentally many weeds. For example, the dandelion was brought over by these English settlers. They're not native. In the 1700s, large sloping green lawns were becoming very popular in England and France, where both George Washington and Thomas Jefferson visited and later emulated that same style in their own homes. This would have had clearly a lot of influence given George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were founding fathers, and many Americans likely emulated that style. With the help of other new technology like the lawnmower and water sprinkler, the concept of the house lawn started to spread across the United States, initially as a symbol of wealth for those with time and money, given the maintenance it takes. That early concept of the lawn as a symbol of upward social mobility has changed little today. While most are planted with stunted, non-native grass, a lush, perfectly manicured lawn is taken as a mark of good neighbors and citizens. This old trade card to the right is a perfect example of this because it advertises the clipper mower and depicts a group of friends or neighbors standing on a perfectly manicured lawn next to a big fancy house, which really shows the connection between lawns and wealth, as well as friendship and neighborliness. I was also interested to know about the science of what happens when you put chemicals into our aquatic ecosystems. As the usage of synthetic fertilizers has increased over the years for industrial, residential, and agricultural purposes, their potentially negative effects are becoming more prominent. These chemicals enter bodies of water in various ways, some of which include agriculture, aquaculture, septic tanks, urban wastewater, urban stormwater runoff, industry, and fossil fuel combustion. This nutrient overload can have a harmful impact on waterways and the life systems they support, particularly through eutrophication, or the enrichment that occurs when a water body contains an excessive amount of nutrients. Growth of aquatic plants is accelerated, particularly with algae, as can be seen in the image on the left. This creates vast dead zones in which oxygen has depleted, and many aquatic organisms such as fish, seagrass, and mollusks cannot survive. The effect of this oxygen depletion can be seen in the series of large fish kills that occurred on Peconic Bay, which is on the tip of Long Island, in 2015. The impact of chemical fertilizers on soil is also extremely significant. In both agricultural and residential settings, the dependence on synthetics causes soil to lose nutrients and bacteria to be killed, which depletes organic matter in the soil. However, the effects of chemical fertilizers are not confined to the environment. Humans, particularly children, are also susceptible to poisoning by lawn chemicals, causing cancer, birth defects, organ damage, neurotoxicity, and many other health-related issues. So let's bring this to present day. What is the pattern of the use of synthetic fertilizers in our country today? The production of synthetic fertilizers has really become a massive industry in America today. In around 1982, our consumption of these fertilizers began to increase, and since then we have seen numbers as high as 24 million tons that we've consumed of synthetic fertilizers. This increase can be attributed to the myriad of technological advancements in the fertilizer field, namely SAPEM's STEM-Progeti urea technology and O'Day's dual pressure ammonia technology, which both decrease production costs and improve production capacity. Other factors contributing to this increase are rising energy costs and population growth. Today, the United States is the fourth largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer and the second largest importer of ammonia and urea. The synthetic fertilizer industry here has been valued at $18 billion, provides 80,000 direct jobs and thousands of other indirect jobs, and involves around 680 companies. The most prominent of these companies are Nutrien, CF Industries, and Mosaic. This industry, despite clearly benefiting our economy and increasing employment, does, as I talked about before, come at a significant environmental cost. So let's bring this closer to home and look at Connecticut. In recent years, the use of lawn grass in Connecticut has grown significantly, with an increase of around 57,000 acres between 1985 and 2010. That's an increase of almost 60,000 acres of lawn acres in 25 years, which is a really significant number. This grass is mostly planted with non-native seed, which does not grow successfully on its own. And at a cause of this, a great deal of maintenance is required. In addition to watering and mowing, many homeowners also apply chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides to stimulate growth, inhibit weeds, and to get rid of grubs and other pesticides in these unnatural lawns. This has become a threat to nearby water bodies, particularly Long Island Sound. It has been found that lawns within 200 yards of the inlets and harbors of Long Island Sound contribute almost 16% of the total nitrogen flowing into those waters. Of the 50 bays and bay segments receiving water quality grades from Save the Sound in their Long Island Sound report card in 2020, only 44% of these bays got a grade of B or above, and 48% got a D or below. Not only this, but as recently as the 1990s, sections of Long Island Sound were being described as a dead sea with oxygen-starved waters, sometimes fatal to shellfish and devoid of finfish. Such events also often result in numerous beach closures, which really shows the really present impact on human populations as well as the environment. As a result of findings like this, today's Connecticut General Statutes states that no person can apply fertilizer, soil amendments, or compost containing phosphate to an established lawn except when the soil is lacking in phosphate or lacking in phosphorus, or that phosphorus is necessary to establish or repair grass. It also states that no person can apply such substances to any portion of a lawn that is 20 feet or less from a body of water. Legislation passed in Connecticut is certainly a step in the right direction, and our state should continue to support legislation that protects our vital waterways. Finally, this is the Long Island Sound report card that I was talking about before. And as you can see, like more to the east near Connecticut, we do tend to have better water quality grades, whereas nearer to New York City, clearly the water quality becomes a bit worse. Finally, I want to make some recommendations for the future. In researching this subject, my main conclusion is that it seems deeply ironic that in seeking to beautify homeowner landscapes, we are simultaneously putting at risk the natural spaces and resources for which our town is known and that we all rely on. But such is the cultural acceptance and symbolism of the bright green lawn, it seems clear that our individual efforts to embrace a more natural landscape will be a necessary part of the solution to lessening the local impact here in Guilford. In this last year of the pandemic, many people forced to be at home have renewed their interest in homesteading and growing a garden. In fact, W. Atlee Burkby & Company, an American seed company, sold more fruit and flower seed than ever before in March 2020. This focus on changing individual mindsets can already be seen to have a broader effect in the pollinator pathway program, which can be seen in the sign on the right here, which seeks to build momentum by connecting and linking homes that embrace organic practices, such as not using as many non-native plants or invasive species, and not using as many pesticides or fertilizers. In this spirit of acting locally, I end by challenging my teachers, school administrators, and fellow students to think about the immediate and powerful impact that we all can have in embracing organic practices for the benefit of our town's natural resources. Thank you all for listening, and a special thank you to Paul Prue, my mentor who's with the Guilford Land Trust, Mrs. Chiappa, my advisor, Mrs. McDonald, the GHS capstone coordinator, and my family. Does anyone have any questions?
Go ahead, Mr. Hoey. Why don't you get us started?
Mr. Raven, thank you very much. Charlotte, wonderful presentation and very, very topical, particularly for a shoreline community. Just a couple of comments. Love to see you finish with the pollinator pathways. The Guilford, the Sustainable Guilford Task Force has just started, well, not just, over the past several months, it's done a is starting to promote the pollinator pathway. The Board of Selectmen presented or signed a proclamation supporting it. So right on target with what's going on with Sustainable Guilford Task Force. Are you familiar with the work that they've been doing?
Not particularly, no, sorry.
Okay, you might find it interesting. I think it might be right up your alley. The second point, I was interested, I actually had a question down. When did you think that the use of these chemicals became more prevalent. And I think you used the date of 1982 was sort of the start. There's a correlation, I think, perhaps, and maybe you can talk to this, but Long Island Sound used to be chock full of lobsters. That industry in Connecticut and along Long Island died sometime in the early 2000s. You think there's a correlation?
I mean, there might be, especially with the rising, like, I think this all began kind of also in the 1950s and with the rise of conformity. And in recent years, we have seen more fish kills and the death of more aquatic organisms. So I think that definitely does have a correlation with the rising use of lawns in Connecticut. I mean, I can't speak to like the actual data associated with that, but I would say that.
Right. My last question is, there was an interesting fact about you can't use fertilizers 20 feet on your lawns, 20 feet from the shore. And if I went back to your earlier slides, where lawns were were very popular among the affluent. Well, the affluent are probably the ones who have properties along the shoreline. Many of them have properties along the shoreline. Who is responsible for enforcing that 20-foot buffer that's supposed to be there? Is there any regulatory body that tries to make sure that doesn't happen?
I'm a little concerned that we've lost Charlotte.
Oh, no.
Charlotte, can you hear us?
I believe there is a position or person. Oh, yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
I can hear everyone.
Okay. Yep, you can go ahead and answer Mr. Hoey's question. Great.
Thank you. I was saying that I'm fairly sure there is a person or position that does regulate that rule. I'm not exactly sure who that is at the moment, but I'm sure it is regulated to some degree.
Thank you, Charlotte, and great job.
Thank you.
Charlotte, we have a question in the chat. Where did you discover your passion for environmental issues?
I think just living in Guilford and having a really outdoorsy family where we're always outside. And I think also just growing up in this generation and with all the issues with climate change and other things, I just felt compelled to really care about those things. And this was just a part of that.
This is Paul Proul speaking. I was the mentor for Charlotte on this. I just wanted to point out that she puts her money where her mouth is, because she has been volunteering with the Guilford Land Trust and helping with trail maintenance and, you know, with our efforts for land conservation for over a year now. And that's much appreciated.
That's terrific. Charlotte, I really appreciated this presentation and the fact that I happen to be here to face facts a little bit for myself, because this administrator kind of loves his lawn, and it made me come kind of face to face with the fact that I need to be very careful with what I do, especially because I do live near the water. So two things. One, what are my organic choices, or how do I go about that and finding inappropriate use, to feed my lawn? And then second, how do we shift the mentality of people, right? Lawns have increasingly become more, more popular. How do we turn the tide with, the mentality of everyone and say, well, maybe, something else, some other kind of space is more appropriate and better for the environment?
Well, there are a lot of organic practices that I've uncovered in this process, some of which are just using compost or compost tea and that kind of thing in the place of these synthetic fertilizers. Another thing that helps to protect your lawn and to make it actually last longer is to cut it to a not so small level. I think it should be above at least an inch. If it's lower than that, the soil is damaged. And to your other question, I think that we don't have to speak ill of lawns in particular, but just try and encourage people to use more organic practices, because the issue isn't with lawns themselves, but what we put on them, I think.
Thank you. Any other questions for Charlotte? Well, Charlotte, thank you very much for presenting on this topic. You did a terrific job, and you're getting a lot of praise in the chat as well. So make sure you read those comments. Yeah, just much appreciated, because it is an important topic, and we appreciate the time you spent on it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for coming.
You got it. London, I'll leave it up to you when you want to get started. You can wait right till 6:30. If you think you've got everybody here who you want here, you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, I think I'm just gonna get started, and if people come in later, then I'll just we'll do it then.
That sounds good.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen.
You got it.
And can you see my face right now, or can you just see my screen?
On the side, we see your name. We see the screen, and then your name, just your name on the side.
Okay, so you don't see my face?
Correct.
Okay. So I'll just get started. Good evening. My name is London LaRose, and welcome to my presentation. I explore different careers in psychology. And so first of all, I'll talk about my plans for the future. And this fall, I will be attending Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. I already have plans to major in psychology, but with psychology covering such a wide expanse of careers, I wanted to do a capstone project around specific careers that I'm potentially interested in going into. And so I researched 3 of them, and with each career, I will cover the basics of what it's about, how I implemented / used my research, and then just my overall final thoughts of it. So these were the 3 careers that I chose: life coaching, health psychologist, and criminal psychology. So first of all, we'll start off with life coaching. And so a life coach they're a type of wellness professional, and they help people progress in their lives and just reach greater fulfillment. They usually do day-to-day stuff instead of stuff from the past. And so they'll help you with your goals, any obstacles you're going with, and coming up with strategies to overcome these obstacles. And so in doing so, they're very unique and specific towards any skills or gifts that you may have. And so one thing that I had questioned just starting off was, what is the difference between therapy and life coaching? And so with therapy, it focuses, again, like I said earlier, it kind of focuses on treating mental illnesses and traumatic experiences one may have experienced in the past. And so some of these mental illnesses can include depression, anxiety, PTSD, and more. And with life coaching, it focuses more on breaking bad habits, resolving block creativity, inspiring motivation, reducing stress, and more short-term problems or achieving future goals. And so a simple way to describe the two is therapy is centered more on healing from the past, while coaching is more on getting to where you wish you want to be next. Also, because therapy is about treating a mental health problem, often it is insured by an insurance company, but this has to be only if you meet the criteria for a mental health disorder and the insurance company deems therapy medically necessary to help you get better. Coaching is usually not covered by health insurance because, like I said earlier, the focus is not on treating an illness. So to become a therapist, one must have an advanced degree, a state license, pass an exam, and have a certain number of supervised hours of practice. So there are a lot of credentials and requirements just to become a therapist. with coaching. Although there are certification programs, there aren't any governing boards, or they don't have the same requirements as a therapist. But most life coaches do tend to have an education in psychology or anthropology, whether that be a major or a minor. In terms of service, therapists are a bit more limited in the where and how. They have to be licensed in the state that they're practicing, so they can't be in several different areas. And then usually therapy itself is typically face-to-face in an office, though sometimes there are variances where, like with the pandemic, we had to do a lot of these sessions through Zoom. But with life coaches, they can work all throughout the United States and even internationally. They happen more frequently over the phone, or again, like I said before, on a meeting app like Zoom or Google Hangouts. So unfortunately, life coaching does not have the most amazing salary, and it's also really hard to pinpoint because it's all dependent on one's dedication, level of mastery, amount of clients, exposure to the media, like popularity. But the average income today in the US is between 30 and 40K, and in the PowerPoint I wrote that only 10 to 20% or so make six-figure incomes, and many more life coaches don't make anywhere near 30K. And so how I implemented it, I wanted to experience life coaching myself, and so I attended 3 separate coaching sessions with a life coach who was certified through the Life Coach School and was working with Jody Moore's program, Better Than Happy. So Jody Moore, she's a life coach that I think is really awesome. She has a team of life coaches who are available for one-on-one coaching, live public coaching calls. I think I have a typo in there, and Q&A sessions. She also has a weekly podcast, which I would recommend listening to. It's really wonderful. And so the way that it all kind of works is, for each session, I would bring up a problem or a challenge in my life, and she would work with this model to try and resolve it. And so this model claims it can solve any problem. For example, one of the problems that I brought up in one of my sessions was when I didn't get into my dream college. And obviously I was very upset and sad about that. And to kind of show an example of how this model works, we're gonna plug that problem into this model. And so first of all, we'll start off with the circumstance where it has to be a fact, and that fact is I did not get into my dream college. And so some of the thoughts that I felt were, I'm not good enough, I wish I would have worked harder, everything is ruined, and a lot more really negative and discouraging thoughts. After that, our thoughts create feelings. And so the feelings that these thoughts gave me was shame, guilt, despair, and a loss of self-worth. And then after that, we then act out our feelings. And so I found myself withdrawing, acting embarrassed, avoiding conversations, being jealous, which all of this eventually led to my result, which was living small. And that didn't really make me feel very good. And so in order to show how I really wanted to show up, I had to modify my thoughts since I can't change my circumstance. And the life coach helped me find more productive thoughts like nothing is wrong, it's just different, and I will have different opportunities that I wasn't expecting. And what if not going to my dream college will actually be a better dream? So these thoughts made me feel hopeful, confident, accepting, open to change, basically all more positive. And so when I feel this way, then I now act proud of my new college choice, engage more, and am more willing to be open. So my new result is that I show up how I really want to. I've used this model over and over. So whenever I have negative feelings, I check my thoughts and learn to manage my mind. So here are my final thoughts about life coaching. And coming from someone who has been to a therapist before, life coaching was definitely more my forte. As of right now, though, I don't think it's something I would like to do for a career. It is something that I'm very interested in doing as a kind of a side career or in addition to my other career. but it has definitely helped me learn how to manage my thoughts and experience life through a happier mindset. So next we'll move on to health psychologist. So health psychology, it's a specialty area that focuses specifically on how biological, social, and psychological factors influence health and illness. So this can be the area that you're in, it can be what you're eating, it can be the weather, it can be so many different things. And the two main goals of health psychology are helping people avoid illness and promoting healthy behaviors. So the thing that I'm most interested about health psychology is finding out what chemical imbalances there are in one's body and using that information to prescribe vitamins or foods that they can start eating to fix it. And so I found someone that does this, and I'll explain more about that later. So as far as payment, again, like I said before, it does depend on geographic location, work setting, educational background, job experience, the amount of clients that you have, but generally they can range from $43K to $130K per year. And to bring it back from before, this is Renee Williams. She is a synergistic, I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, but she's a synergistic body health coach and nutrition specialist in Grand Junction, Colorado. She is also my mom's college roommate and a good family friend. So this was very convenient that I had her. So one thing that she explained on her website is that, and then this is just in quotes, "In my practice, I spend time getting to know my clients and then determine what information is still missing to help identify what is going on biochemically in their bodies. Once the client has the diagnosis, I work with their physicians to help clients make lifestyle changes to alter the trajectory they are on from slow physical decline to repair, regeneration, and healing. By doing an additional investigation that the physicians do not always have time for, I can help my clients make connections that lead to a better understanding of why they are suffering, and so they can take the steps to alleviate what is causing them pain. I am passionate about finding better answers that bring true understanding, which then brings hope, which is essential in all healing." So in this slide, I'll explain kind of what she specializes in. So as you can see in this chart, she specializes in chronic inflammation, digestive distress, hormone imbalance, emotional well-being, and immune dysfunction. And so what happens is you send in a sample of your spit, urine, stool, and if needed, your blood for her to analyze. And the lab will analyze it, and it will send back with results stating what vitamins or what foods you need to avoid in order to heal yourself. And so I was going to do this myself, but instead I made my mom my lab rat. And so my mom, she did a spit test done to assess her hormone levels. And so of the 6 hormones tested, only 2 of them were in the normal range. The rest were extremely low. She discovered that her stress hormone cortisol is always high, but especially spiked between 3 to 5 p.m. every day. So the interesting about this is that is when I come home from school. So I'm not exactly sure how I feel about that. But Renee now has my mom on 3 different nutritional supplements that will help balance her hormones and help her with her health goals. So with final thoughts, out of all of them, this seems to be the route that I'm most interested in. I really want to look into this more. I'm very interested in learning about chemicals and kind of that stuff, but the only downside is this means a lot of chemistry, which since I haven't had a lot of exposure to it, I don't know if I'm actually really good at it. So I want to see more and try a little bit more to see if this is actually something I would be interested in, just due to the amount of chemistry involved. So lastly, we'll go into criminal psychology. And so I want to look into the people who interview suspects and determine from their body language and nonverbals if they're telling the truth or not. So this is what criminal psychologist is all about. It studies the behaviors and thoughts of criminals. And so a lot of what happens is criminal psychology can cover a wide field pretty much, but they work in courtrooms, and they also work in police and federal agents to help solve crimes, and they just do a lot of really cool stuff. Some popular TV shows that showcase criminal psychology is Criminal Minds and CSI. So if you are really interested in those shows or in criminal psychology, check out those shows. And then with the payment, according to pay scale, the average annual salary for a criminal psychologist is around like $60K or so, but the range can be from $58K to $140K per year. So how I implemented it, this man right here, this is Joe Navarro. He's an ex-FBI agent who now trains people on how to read body language. And I had the extreme pleasure of meeting with him over Zoom to talk about how to get into FBI work, what he does, and why he chose to teach people about how to read body language. And so he's written a lot of different books and featured in numerous interviews where he talks about body language, and he talks people through on what to look for, what not to look for. And if you're interested in seeing more of his stuff, you can go on YouTube and search his name. And he has several videos where he breaks down people's behavior in specific situations. And this can be like a date or a political debate. So I've read 2 of his books, which I have right here. So this first one, it is called What Everybody is Saying, and this book is a wonderful book to read. It explains so many different nonverbals, and in case you guys don't know what that means, nonverbals are the transmission of messages or signals through nonverbal ways. This can include eye contact, facial expressions, gestures, posture, and body language. So I've learned so much from this book. I've been able to read people better and understand more nonverbals, and that way I can either determine what mood they're in or if they're kind of more hostile. So the second book, it's called Dangerous Personalities, and what happens in this book is Mr. Navarro outlines the specific traits in people that are dangerous or kind of more harmful. And so as the cover says, it's an essential survival guide. From this book, I've learned to be more aware of other people around me, especially those that may be potentially dangerous. This has helped me a lot in public when, like if I'm alone and I see someone that is kind of more sketchy, I know what to do in order to avoid any encounters or to minimize encounters. And so in both of these books, Mr. Navarro, he talks about his experience as an FBI agent, which has been a really big help in my research into criminal psychology. So my final thoughts for this one is that I have always been really interested in body language, but I'm not extremely interested in the criminal aspect of it. I think I'm welcome to look more into it, especially learning more about the specific nonverbals there are. But as of right now, it's not something that I'm looking to go into for a future career. And this is kind of my conclusion. I'll talk more than what is said on the slide, but this capstone has been such a benefit for me. As a senior graduating on Thursday and then going to college this fall, it was really important that I planned my schedule and I knew what classes I wanted to take, and this capstone helped shape that. It helped me become more knowledgeable about the things that I do and do not want to do in the future. I still am not 110% sure what I want to do in the future, especially regarding my career, but I found that looking into these specific careers has helped me be able to determine and get closer to that goal. And so I want a mixture of everything that falls under the concept of positive psychology. That's what I've found in general. But thank you so much for attending my capstone, and I hope you guys learned at least a little bit. And if you guys have any questions, I'll get out of this slide so you can see my face.
Any questions? I thought you did a really nice job, London. I like the way you took each piece of it and then kind of applied it to, a scenario and an expert to really dig deeper on it rather than just doing your own research on it. Really took a professional's opinion and experiences and kind of made it your own. I thought that was really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions for London?
I put something in the chat, but I'll go ahead and ask it.
Sure.
Curious what made London decide to be interested in body language study?
Thank you for your question. I think just all throughout my entire life, I've been interested in what makes people kind of tick, what makes people do the things that they do, say the things that they do, and act the way that they do. And so what sparked the idea of this entire capstone was actually that book by Joe Navarro. I was recommended it on, someone on social media had said that it had been one of the best books that they had read. And so it was What Everybody Is Saying. And I decided, I'm gonna buy it, I'm gonna read it. And so after reading it, I thought, wow, this is a great book. And from there, I was nearing kind of the time that I needed to declare what my capstone was. And so I decided, well, since I know I'm going to major in psychology, I want to know kind of more what specific career to go into. And so that's what sparked it, really.
Any other questions or anything else you'd like to know? If you don't mind me asking, it's a tough one. What was your dream school?
So my dream school was Brigham Young University, and that's where all my brothers are going. But I'm actually going to BYU Salt Lake, so it's an extension of BYU.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, you never know where the world's going to take you, and what it holds for you. And I know you do great out there.
I'm excited.
Okay. Well, London, that was a terrific job. Thank you so much for presenting for us and enlightening us on those career choices. If there's no other questions, we can let you go and have a great night.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
You too.
So I guess I can start.
The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Why am I? Okay. So I did my project on the evolution of perspective in Western art. Okay. So I wanted to start by explaining the question that I went into this wanting to answer. So I was interested in studying the process of people or artists discovering perspective in the history of Western art. And I wanted to do a capstone project because I wasn't able to take an art class this year in school, and that's something that I really liked in the past. And I wanted to study art history because I wanted to add some sense of, I guess, direction to my project. I wanted to make sure I wasn't just at home doing drawings, but really learning something. So that's where the history part came from. And my project mostly consisted of a lot of reading. So my mentor helped me get a textbook, and we talked through a lot of chapters in the book. And then I created some artwork as I was reading that kind of reflected the periods of art I was reading about. So yeah, and the other thing I want to talk about is that my viewpoint on this question has changed a lot as I've been learning. So I no longer really see perspective as a specific thing that was discovered, and I no longer see there having been a correct way to show perspective in a piece of art, but rather I think I now see perspective as one of the primary ways that artists kind of show the meaning of their work, and maybe so yeah, I guess that's where I'll start. I wanted to also just explain briefly what I meant by perspective. So in art classes I've taken before, I've learned about 1- and 2-point perspective, which are types of linear perspective. So basically when you're doing a painting or a drawing, often in order to depict depth, you'll use one of these 2 models. So this one on the left here is 1-point perspective, and these are sketches that I did early on in the year. I'm just making sure I understood what I was talking about. But you can see that in 1-point perspective, there's one point in the back of the image where all of the lines converge, and that's called the vanishing point. So this is, you could imagine this is like a hallway, and these would be like the tiles in the hallway, and this would be the back wall. So it's kind of a mathematical way to depict depth on a 2D surface. And then 2-point perspective is here, and you can see there are 2 different points, but it's a similar idea. And yeah, I used 2-point perspective, or tried to, in one of the drawings that I did. Sorry. So yeah, I was just gonna go through some of the points in history that I learned about that I thought were really important, and I was gonna do that through talking about pieces of art and then showing my art. So the first place I started really with my research was medieval art, so the Middle Ages, mainly the 13th to 15th centuries. And this painting was painted by Ambrogio Lorenzetti in the 14th century, and this was created for the City Hall in Siena. And it was created to kind of promote the civic values and the, I guess, ethics in society. And it was part of a bigger piece that was called The Effects of Good Government. So it was really important to this artist that he depicted the specific city and the specific space that his people existed in. Historically, in a lot of art throughout the Middle Ages, that hadn't been important to artists, because a lot of art had been created for churches or for prayer books, and artists had often just placed their figures in with a gold leaf background or something, because at that time religion, which primarily funded art, was seen as something that was very distant from people just living in the day-to-day life, and it wasn't seen to exist in a similar space. But suddenly in a painting like this, it was really important to depict that space. So I think you can see that the artist was very carefully showing the city around him, and you can definitely see he was showing like a 3D space on that 2D surface. Like this looks like a 3D box, and the people look like they're getting smaller. On the other hand, I don't think it looks necessarily super normal, or people often use the word convincing to us. I feel like if I were to stand in that scene, it'd almost be like I was in like Alice in Wonderland or something, and you're in like kind of weirdly shaped, contorted architecture. And I think that's because he wasn't using the linear perspective that we're used to seeing, that is kind of tailored to our eyes, that was created during the Renaissance. And this is a similar image. It was created slightly later, but still in that period between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And this was created for a prayer book, but I think it shows the same issue of depicting space, or not issue because it wasn't a problem, but just that the artist was depicting depth, but not necessarily doing it in a way that looks super realistic. It looks like the figures in the background are getting smaller, but they almost appear to be like stacked on top of each other rather than really moving backwards. And I just think that that's like a really beautiful, cool painting as well. This was the first drawing that I did for my project. So I went into this drawing wanting to make a hallway without using like 1-point perspective that I had learned. So I basically tried not to use like lots of straight lines and like rulers, and I didn't create a vanishing point, and I just kind of drew as I imagined artists like Lorenzetti would have. And one thing that I found really interesting when I was doing this piece is that I went back after I had worked on it and just measured the lines to see how closely it resembled 1-point perspective, and I actually found that I had basically just created a 1-point perspective image. So I ended up going back and changing it so that it didn't follow those rules as closely, which it was just interesting to see how that's so ingrained in my brain. The next period of art that I thought was really important that I studied a lot was the Renaissance. So the Renaissance was the period during which the 1-point perspective and the linear perspective that I was talking about before really was, I guess, discovered, if that's the word we want to use. But that's when artists first wrote about it and started using it. And I actually read, the first thing that I read that my mentor showed to me was an essay written, I believe it was 1435, but it was sometime during the Renaissance, and it was written by, it was the first man who had ever written during the Renaissance on perspective, and it was a primary source, and it was really interesting to read and hear all of his kind of ideas about the philosophy behind art of the period, and I think this painting shows that very well. So this is a painting, it's supposed to show like classical philosophers, and so this man, I can't find my cursor, but the man in the middle, with the gray beard is supposed to be Plato, and then the man with the brown hair is Aristotle, and the two sides of the painting are supposed to represent like the philosophical, more humanities-based thinkers who regrettably were very much men, I guess, or at least those the people who were represented in the history that I studied largely. And then on the right were the more like mathematical thinkers, and I think the perspective is really important in this piece in that it centers our focus on the two men in the center, and also that issue of thinking about the human that I was talking about in the last painting or in the first painting, where the civic life and the actual environment of the city was really important. That issue is still very prevalent in this image. During the Renaissance, there was a big focus on the individual and the individual's place in society. And it wasn't that religion was less of a focus of people's lives, but religion was not seen as something that was so distant. And religious ideas and these historical ideas, like this painting shows, could be represented in a more realistic space. And also a lot of the artists who were painting these works during the Renaissance were also architects, so it makes sense that it would have been important to them to depict their work in a really mathematical way. So these were two drawings I did when I was studying the Renaissance. So the first one is the 2-point perspective drawing, and I'd never used 2-point perspective before, so I'm not entirely sure that that's exactly like rendered perfectly, but it was definitely interesting to try. The two vanishing points were like right here and here. And I decided to do that one with lines because I want it to be very structured and based in like the linear perspective. The other drawing it's based off of, I just like found a photograph on my phone of a gargoyle at Notre Dame, and I chose that because I had earlier studied Gothic cathedrals in France as like the first chapter I read. So I thought that was an interesting connection, but it's supposed to represent chiaroscuro, which is basically the modeling of like light and dark, which is another technique that kind of came to the forefront during the Renaissance. During the Middle Ages, that hadn't really been used a lot. I looked at a lot of like paintings of, for example, like the Virgin Mary with like a skirt that was completely just one color with maybe some like streaks to represent folds, whereas during the Renaissance, like light and dark was used much more, and that of course is one way to depict depth and like a 3D image. So I have another period, which is the Baroque. I think this painting is really fascinating and really cool one to show when we're talking about perspective. So basically, this is the ceiling of a church that you're looking at here. These are the actual windows. And then you're basically looking at the painting, and the artist has essentially, the textbook chapter that I read talked about making the ceiling disappear, because basically it looks like you're looking into the heavens instead of at the ceiling of the church. And this very clearly shows perspective because the architecture has been extended into the sky, and we're also looking at the figures from the bottom. And the author or the artist used what's called foreshortening, which basically is when you're looking at an object or a person from kind of a strange angle that distorts it and often makes the limbs look shorter. So this was definitely it must have been a very technically challenging painting, but I also think it's a really good example of a work that shows kind of how the socio-political situations of the day could have very much affected the artist and the artist's use of perspective, because this painting was created during the Counter-Reformation. So I learned a lot about the Protestant Reformation, the period and during the 16th century and extending beyond that, when a lot of people became disillusioned with the Catholic Church and left the Catholic Church, and in the Protestant Reformation, and then the Counter-Reformation was the Catholic Church's reaction to that, and a lot of so there was kind of the Catholic Church was trying to idealize and centralize Catholicism, and one key aspect of that was through art. So a cathedral like this with this like crazy beautiful ceiling would have been a way to kind of attract people to Catholicism, which I just think is really interesting, is kind of learning about history through art. This painting is from the same era, and I wanted to show this one because I created a drawing that I'll show that was directly based on this one. But I thought this one was fascinating because it was painted by a woman, and women were not, there were not many women in my textbook, and in the history of Western art, women were not recognized, but women were also not really allowed to become artists, largely because of the barriers to their education. And this painting is really fascinating because she not only is painting as a woman, but she's actually painting herself. And I learned a lot about how the self-portrait actually wasn't super common during the Middle Ages. It didn't really matter to people who the artist was, but suddenly during the Renaissance, when the artist became a more respected member of society, that idea of signing a painting and even including yourself in your painting was suddenly sometimes used, but it was still kind of a radical idea of asserting your importance. And I think it's very interesting that she as a woman would be able to do that. And also that she not only paints herself, but she's apparently painting herself in this painting as an allegory of painting. So she's supposed to represent painting. So I think that shows even more that she's kind of comfortable asserting herself and saying that she's important enough as a painter to be representative of the entire medium. And then also I read about how the perspective of this painting, the fact that we're seeing her from a very complex angle, and that must have been very hard to paint, also kind of is a display of her skill in this largely male-dominated profession. So I thought that kind of looking at art from a feminist viewpoint, which I feel like you could write or do a whole other capstone on, I thought this was really interesting. And so these were the two drawings that I wanted to show related to this period. So this one on the right is based off of that drawing, the self-portrait as the allegory of painting. And it's certainly not an exact replica, but I had fun with this one trying to copy it. It was a reductive drawing, so I like covered the paper in charcoal and then I erased away. So that was cool. And then this drawing on the left is actually based off of a 19th century sculpture, which was created during the Romantic period, so much later, but I wanted to show it because I think the angle and kind of the qualities of the work, like the lines, do kind of emulate some of the ideas of, or the techniques of the Baroque. And also, I thought this is a good example of showing how the different art periods connected in my mind. And that was one of my favorite things about the project, was learning about the connections between periods of art. And there were a lot of ideas that I saw kind of crop up and then be rejected, but then come back in later years, which I thought was very interesting. So there are two more periods I wanted to talk about. So Impressionism was, I think, a very important period in terms of the use of perspective. I think Impressionism not only saw like a technical shift in perspective, but also a shift in kind of what perspective could mean, how we could define perspective. So this painting was made by Renoir, who was, I always have trouble pronouncing the names, my mentor could tell you that, who was, I think, one of the most famous 19th century Impressionist painters. And I really liked this painting. I just thought it was really beautiful. But this painting shows ordinary working class people in Paris on their day off at a dance hall. And it very much exemplifies a lot of the ideas of Impressionism. First of all, in its depiction of common people. So historically, a lot of art had been either created for churches or created for nobility, but this was during this period that changed. And also in its depiction of a single moment in time from a single perspective. So when you look at this painting, you're seeing it from a very precise angle. It seems to be very much from one person's viewpoint. You're also seeing a snapshot in time because I think specifically through the author's use of movement and through the lighting. So if you look at, for example, like the patches of sunlight on this man's sweater, in like a moment, those could totally change. But the way the artist has captured the image, it looks like we're seeing that single moment. And I thought it was really interesting learning about Impressionism because apparently this idea of capturing a single moment was very much a product of a lot of changes that had happened in society at this time. So industrialization and like urbanization. Also, I guess Darwinism and Marxism were all kind of ideas and events which altered the way people saw the world and suddenly made people feel that maybe things weren't as concrete or certain as they had once thought. And that kind of led to this idea of depicting transience in art. So this was the drawing I did for this period. I chose a sunset because I think a sunset is a good example of something that is very transient, and you can pause, like take a picture of a sunset and at a different instant in time, it'll never look the same again. And I don't think that ever another day, the sunset will look exactly the same. And also the Impressionists used a lot of bold colors. That was a big part of Impressionism. So I thought that was a good kind of way to tie that in. That's just a picture of the sunset. I based it off of a picture on my phone. So I thought this was an interesting one to show, just like the way the colors translated onto the page. And the last period I wanted to talk about was modernism. So I learned a lot about modernism, which occurred during the 20th century and before and between and then after the World Wars. So this painting was created before World War I in 1912, but it's a painting, it's kind of a collage as well. So basically it's this is like a print of chair caning, and then this is streaks of like paint, and it was painted by Picasso, who's a cubist. So a lot of cubism was about basically taking forms and like splitting them up on the canvas and then also showing things from many different viewpoints. And I thought this painting was really interesting when I read about it because apparently it's all kind of about challenging the way we perceive illusion and abstraction. So although the chair caning right here looks like the most real thing on the painting and it looks like the most 3D thing, it's actually maybe the most unreal thing because it's just a print and it's pretending to be something it isn't. It's an illusion, like all of that Renaissance art that depicted perspective that wasn't really real. Whereas these streaks of paint are really there, and they're not trying to be anything that they aren't. So in some ways, maybe they are more real than that the printed chair, which I guess that idea maybe seems a little like out there in and of itself, but it was really interesting reading because I guess this was a period during which artists were interested in embracing the fact that painting was limited in that it was just showing a 2D space, and they suddenly felt like that didn't have to be hidden through depicting fake 3D space. And I also read about the fact that this was a product of changes in science. So Newtonian science and kind of concrete laws of physics were suddenly, I guess, slightly shattered during this period by theories of people like Einstein, which suddenly suggested that time and space were maybe not as absolute as had once been thought. So some of these kind of questioning time and space and reality were in ways a product of science, which I also thought was really interesting to learn that these artists were really aware of that. So the final piece of art I wanted to show was this one. I created this one very much based off of that Picasso painting / collage. And my intention with this one was that the viewer looking at it has a moment of like hesitation as to like which flowers are real and which flowers are drawn. So yeah, and I think it creates that similar tension between like what's really there and what's abstraction and what's illusion, because while the dried flowers were, of course, like, those were maybe the most real because they were once really flowers. On the other hand, the drawn flowers, I tried to make much more vibrant and maybe look more alive. So if those flowers are alive and the others are dead, maybe those ones are more real. And then, of course, there's like the tension between the 3D space of the flowers that are really coming off the page and the ones that aren't, but maybe hopefully kind of appear to be. So yeah, I thought this was a good place to stop, because I think that this drawing kind of speaks to the fact that I've learned that perspective can mean much more than just linear perspective and just drawing a hallway and making it look like it's receding into space, but it can really be more about what the artist is bringing to the artwork and the way that the viewer sees it, and maybe something more metaphorical than even really technical about kind of the way that we perceive artwork. So yeah, that was mostly my project, and it really just consisted of me doing readings and then talking about them and then trying to reflect that back in my work. And yeah, I wanted to also say thank you so much to Dr. Myers, my mentor, because I definitely would not have learned half this much without you. So yeah.
Nice job, Hannah. Really, really detailed presentation. I love how you created a product off what you learned. That was really cool. Does anybody have any questions or any comments for Hannah? Go ahead, Dr. Myers.
Hannah, what a beautiful presentation, and you covered so much over the course of this year. You really went well beyond a college course in the history of Western art, and with this really special focus on perspective. So it gave you a structure and a way to organize the way you were learning that history, and of course creating your own artwork in conversation with the history so that you can master these techniques and think about them so profoundly. It was just such a joy to watch, and I really congratulate you on your presentation, but also on the whole year. And I guess one of the questions that I would have now that the course has come to an end and you go off into the summer to perhaps work on your own artwork is which of the techniques, and it could be collective techniques, do you think as a modern artist in your own time you would find most compelling to experiment with first? Going beyond the exercises of learning them, but actually employing them in your own creative work.
I don't know, that's an interesting question. I feel like I don't know, I really liked the end working with like multiple different media. I thought that was interesting. I think, yeah, a combination is fun. And I think that also lends itself to like thinking about the ways that the different meanings of the different movements could be like combined. So yeah, but I also tend to be someone who likes to work in like a naturalistic style. So yeah.
Well, I can't wait to see that work. It'll be fun to see how your portfolio expands based on this.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Hannah.
Thank you.
So we don't have any questions for Hannah, but we want to say thank you to Professor Myers. It's been a wonderful experience for her. I'm Hannah's mom. This is her dad.
So nice to meet you.
We haven't actually met in person, but thank you so much. It's been such a great experience, and Hannah has looked forward to every call with you.
Well, I have as well. It's been wonderful every other week to see how she has progressed in her thinking. And Hannah, you're just such a sensitive reader and viewer, and you bring those skills of analysis together so brilliantly. I couldn't have had a more sophisticated set of conversations about perspective in the history of Western art with anyone else. So it's a joy to meet you as Hannah's parents, and thank you for the opportunity to work with Hannah this year. It was really a pleasure.
The only other thing I'd like to add is thank you, Joel, and thank Guilford High School for making this possible.
Yeah,
It's really a great program.
It's our pleasure. These nights where we get to see these presentations certainly makes it all worthwhile. She put a lot of work and effort in. What a nice compliment from Dr. Myers. Such a high compliment.
Well, it was very, very impressive. I've taught a lot of students on the university level, both undergraduates and graduate students, and I've never had a better student. So
That's impressive, Hannah. Should be very proud.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions or anything they'd like to hear from for Hannah? Hannah, is this going to influence your future education? Is this changed direction in any way or influenced you?
Yeah, maybe. I definitely am really interested in art history, and definitely see myself studying it in college. I also wanted to say thank you so much to Mrs. Camarco for being my advisor through this and helping me work with the school and for being here too. It's very sweet. But yeah, I think I'm not sure what I want to study really in college, but I definitely will study some art history, and I'm very excited to be back in a world that's more normal, so I can go out to an art museum and really see art.
Absolutely.
we all agree with you.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Beautiful job, Hannah. Bravo.
Great job, kiddo. And if there's no other questions, that'll end this session of capstone presentations for tonight. Thank you all for being here, and again, congratulations, Hannah, on a great job.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.